So today's my dad's birthday, and it's making me rethink a lot about what I said in my last video about my parents raising me in this secluded, isolated way. Because, as cliche as this sounds, they definitely did the best with what they had, and the best with, what they could and how they knew how to raise a child. And I actually did go places with my parents, up until adolescence. I had quite a few Chuck E. Cheese birthdays. My brother, he went to Legoland. He went to a lot of water parks because he has a summer birthday. Unlike me, I have a winter birthday. So I guess there were less options. But yeah, so they took us places. We went to a lot of restaurants, and we didn't go to the movies sparingly. We went quite often, actually. So we did things. They took us out. It's just that it wasn't in a social way. It wasn't in a way where, they would have to interact with other people. It was just mostly, apart from the Chuck E. Cheese thing and those birthdays that I had as a child, they would just take us out as a family. So they didn't ever really have to interact with other people. The one exception, though, is my dad actually had a friend when I was younger, a guy named Charlie, who he hung out with sometimes. And he would bring us over sometimes when, he would go over to Charlie's house, have something to drink, play dominoes or cards, and, my dad had a friend. But I don't know what happened to the relationship, because after a while, we stopped going over there, and I stopped hearing about Charlie. My mom never had any friends, unfortunately. I really don't know why, but, what I mean by the isolation and me not going anywhere is that they were reluctant to bring me into a situation where they would have to socialize. So therefore, I rarely did those kinds of things. I had a sleepover when I was 11. I had those Chuck E. Cheese birthdays and other parties where other kids would be involved and other parents would be involved. And I went to other people's birthday parties, where, sometimes my parents would go, but then for the most part, they would just drop me off and leave, either because they had to go to work or because they just felt uncomfortable in social situations and they didn't want to have to interact with other parents. And I guess, I wasn't necessarily trying to say that my parents did this maliciously or on purpose, but definitely, they were uncomfortable. And I also can't really put this all on my parents because I lived in a neighborhood that was very atomized and alienated. And I don't know if my parents, when they picked this neighborhood out, if they did that intentionally. And I kind of suspect that they didn't, because in the mid-early 90s, there were block parties that the neighborhoods would have. And that was really cool. And it was a neighborhood association, and people would meet together and discuss events that they could have, Christmas caroling and the block parties and just other little functions. But once the woman who was heading that, at least on my block, once she passed away, all of that stopped. And neighbors just secluded themselves and never talked to each other. There was one next door neighbor who I have had to this day for maybe 15 years. And I only went to because they had a boy and a girl, and then later on, when I was older, they had another boy and another girl. But back when it was just their two kids, I only went over to their house maybe once or twice. I suspect because, the girl was maybe 2 or 3 years older than me. Maybe she felt I wasn't mature enough to hang out with her. And definitely my mom had some weird animosity towards them. I don't know why. They're not bad people. I don't know, maybe she just felt awkward and uncomfortable around them because, they had a successful marriage and an ideal family. There could be a lot of reasons, but I only went over to her house once. Barely talked to the family after that. You know, I'd say hello sometimes. I'd see the neighbor boy mowing the lawn, but there was just very little interaction. There was another kid, or another two girls on the corner of my block who I hung out with, again, only once. And I don't know why that was. You know, maybe because they're also older than me, because those two girls and then the neighborhood girl from right next door would hang out with each other, but they wouldn't hang out with me. And, you know, other than those people, you know, it's just a very quiet, eerily quiet neighborhood. No one ever really went outside. No one ever really interacted with each other. It was just sort of like a hibernating spot. You know, people would go to work, people would go to school, and then they'd come back inside and stay in their homes. You know, kids would ride their bikes sometimes together in groups, but that was like further back in the neighborhood, where it was like less developed. The more developed side where I lived, where the houses were a little bit better, they just didn't interact with each other. So I had a secluded neighborhood, which added to the fact that my parents are uncomfortable in social situations. So there was just like a lot of isolation. And on top of that, the opportunities that I had to interact with my own extended family members were limited. Because my mom had uncomfortable experiences with her extended family when she was younger, she decided that raising us, me and my brother, we would have little to no contact with them. You know, I went over to my cousin Amina's house a couple times. We hung out sometimes. I would see my cousin Brittany whenever I spent the night over my grandma's house sometimes. And then I would see people at like reunions once a year, or the Christmas gathering that my grandmother hosted once a year. But other than that, I had little to no contact with my family, because my mother had bad experiences with them. Can't explain what that is. I mean, I know some details, but that's just too personal. But yeah, I don't really know if other people have gone through this. I suspect that they don't, because, you know, other people that I know, they still are in contact with their cousins. They're still in contact with family. But I just had limited exposure to family, to other people in society, because of the limitations of my parents' anxiety and, you know, social constraints. So, you know, even though it's not something that I can say, like, this is your fault, like, I blame you for me being awkward, I blame you for me having these problems socializing, it still, regardless, has set me back, and it's going to take many years for me to unlearn these habits.